but I'm also working alongside Tokona Te Raki to support them communicate the preferable futures that they are moving towards. So ngā mihi Tokona Te Raki, they are a Māori futures collective, and they exist to improve outcomes and lives for Māori, especially rangatahi. They've been described to me as a part think tank, part do tank. And the think part is the extensive research that they do. And the do tank is where they model, test and iterate solutions. So they're leading the movement to end streaming for Aotearoa, and they're in the front, but in the back, they've been commissioned by the Mātauranga Iwi Leaders Group. And they've convened hui with over 20 organisations across the motu who are also aligned to the kaupapa. And Action Station are hosting this session to support the mahi and to enable you who are the engaged membership to deepen your understanding of this issue. So I thought I'd just like to start with a karakia to start, and then we can I can introduce you to the panelists. So mauri ora, mauri oho, mauri tu, mauri ora. Kia tātou haumie huie taikie. So throughout this particular session, you're going to be invited to share your questions. Really, that is just the most valuable part of it. But please just be aware that we have a Q&A function. So there's a chat function, but there's a Q&A function, and that is where we're going to be sharing the messages. So that's just up at the top of your screen. At the moment, there's a very good question in there that Piripi will have to answer for us later. Maybe just go and pop up there and just check it out and see that that's working for you. Now, just a note on that, if you're wanting to submit a question but you'd like to stay anonymous, then I would invite you to change the profile name on your Zoom handle. And then that will allow you to just answer a question and not have it tied to you, which we want to really make you feel welcome to do that. So I think that is about all that of the housekeeping. So we're very, very lucky tonight to be joined by three rangatahi who are relatively recent recruits of Tokona Te Raki, and they've come here tonight to share their personal stories of streaming with us. And I really want to mihi to them, because young people sharing with us their private experiences to deepen our understanding is a real gift to us. So you're going to hear from Tonee Kana, followed by Kaya Staples, and then after that, Giahnnii Paraku. Each of them are going to share a different perspective of the streaming issue to really deepen our understanding. So I'd like now to pass to you, Tonee.
Oh, kia ora, Megan. Tēnā tātou, ko Tonee Kana tuku ingoa. Te uri tēnei ngō Waikato Tānui. I'm one of the rangatahi here at Tokona Te Raki. Been here for about a year, and I'm really loving the mahi we're getting into. So yes, I'm here to share a bit of a personal story with streaming. So spin this bit of a yarn for you. So I was streamed into the cabbage class in high school. Pretty much had all of the Māori and Pasifika students in this class, and alongside us we had most of the problem students. Now, many of which who were expelled or left after about the first year, or maybe even just got to year 11. This class became pretty infamous throughout school. We had a bit of a reputation as the demon class. The teachers hated to deal with us, and it honestly made it really hard to learn and try and maintain studies as I went through my high school years. It seems as though the school kind of pinned us all together. We knew that we were considered as the low class, so to say, and so did the rest of the school. That left us with a sense of embarrassment, placed a mindset in us that we'll always be considered as dumb. And another problem I had with streaming was the use of prerequisites. Now, even though I gained level 3, I was told I was unable to study a BCom at Auckland Uni because I had not gained enough credits in certain subjects in high school. That would be like things like science and math, calculus, things like that. I was unable to complete these courses at high school as I was encouraged to do easier papers and told I may struggle with higher sciences and maths. This would culminate in me having to pay around $15,000 just to spend 1 year in a bridging course at Auckland Uni. Alongside that was the expensive opportunity cost. So it really took a bit out just to kind of do what I could have done at high school. So personally, I consider streaming to be a financial, mental, emotional, and mana diminishing practice used to impact the wairu of students. It perpetuates the mindset of restraint and underachieving, creating an environment where the chance of success and improvement is tenuous. So, and on the other side of streaming, my partner was actually streaming to the high class. The problem with this was the environment takes a massive toll on mental well-being. The high pressure placed on students makes it hard for them to cope with failure. We found out once she got a low grade. And often the schedules are packed with extra classes and papers and study that require them to put in rigorous hours to maintain a high grade. Alongside that was the external expectations from parents, family, friends, and fellow classmates who observe and compete with this. Yeah, that was quite a difficult thing to go through. But I'll now pass it on to Kaya to share her story. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Tonee. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Kaya Staples toku ingoa. He uri tēnei no ngā iwi o ngā tahu ngā puhi te aroa anō hoki, ko tētahi o ngā rangatahi mahi ana ki Tokona Taraki. Kia ora everyone, my name is Kaya Staples and I'm part of the Rangatahi Academy here at Tokona. Streaming was one of the first kaupapa that was introduced to us here at the Academy, and I was immediately triggered by this kaupapa as the experiences and outcomes of my own personal education finally started to make sense. If Tokona had not campaigned this systems change initiative, I would have never realised that this unfair practice of streaming was real and continuing to disadvantage our people today. I was the token Māori girl at a decile 8 school who was the teacher's pet and tried their hardest to be at the top of the class. Although I believed I was putting in the effort and I had a positive attitude towards school, I was never rewarded or noticed academically. Instead, I felt I was always in the shadow of the Pākehā achievers. I was made leader of the kapahaka group and always encouraged in sports at school, but never supported academically, leaving me with less opportunities. I believe streaming is more visible in high school as I noticed the bias within the structure and some teachers was more obvious, and the struggle continued mentally and emotionally for me. I felt my motivation disappear in high school with the lack of support and cultural identity or pathways for Māori did not help my aspirations. I always felt like the dumb brown girl trying to fit in, and my needs were never considered or taken seriously to be able to thrive during high school. Instead, I spent my 4.5 years at high school to only leave with NCA level 1. Now that I'm a mother of 2 beautiful boys, my passion to have our people excel in education is even more prevalent. I've seen my own son compare himself to the kids that are in the top group, and as a result, not feeling worthy enough or as smart as the other kids in his class. This is damaging the wairoa of our tamariki, and as a mother and as mothers and nurturers of our world, we can use our voice to end this unfair practice and instead mana enhance our tamariki to thrive. I want my tamariki and all to have equal opportunities in a fair education. Sadly, my experience reflects the narrative that Māori are not mentally capable, but are more inclined to maintain a living by manual labour rather than by mental labour, as told by the School Inspector of 1862. This narrative was ingrained into the education system from colonialism and is still prevalent today. That's my personal experience with streaming so far, and I'll pass it on to Giahnnii.
Tēnā tātou, ko Giahnnii Paraku toku ingoa, ko te Atiawa te iwi. And yeah, I'm also one of the rangatahi researchers here at Tokona. So yeah, I kind of struggle to reflect on my experience in the education system. As I reflect on my personal experience in the classroom, I'm also being maths. I actually didn't have any awareness of what streaming was, and let alone that streaming having a negative effect on my journey through education and even into further life. In the classroom, I reflect and I noticed that it was actually full of people that looked like me, that being Māori, of Indigenous, and also like me, being misbehaved. And to me, I see that it was made very clear that there wasn't much expectations on us to achieve highly. And I kind of felt like we were just there to fill in time and just be there at school, which doesn't really sound too great. And looking at that also is another factor of how I identify myself with that and in that system. As in, if I see myself struggling in a classroom, I identify with that. And that makes it hard to open up and communicate that, let alone to say your support at home or even your peers, as there tends to be a bit of whakama around it, and kind of asking a question when you think that it's a stupid question, then now you think you're stupid. So yeah, not really that great, but there's some research shows that the relationships between the teachers and the students is quite known to be, I guess, good if the relationship maintains. So what does that look like? Is the teachers just kind of placing students in the back of the classroom, or are they making a conscious effort to build up the interpersonal relationships with their students? For me, it wasn't, but maybe they are today. So we'll see what happens. So yeah, kia ora. I'll pass it back over to Megan.
Kia ora, kia ora koutou. That was pretty hard-hitting to hear your personal stories. I mean, for me, this is it's an intellectual idea that you've just made really, really real. So I really wanted to thank you for sharing with us. And I think the challenge is always, in my head, it's like, but what's the alternative? And it's just about putting people on tracks that are about where they're at. But I think that that's a really simplistic understanding of what the potential is in a classroom. I think that there's alchemy in a classroom. I think that I think we need to sort of lift our gaze higher, because I think we're emerging from a past where we've thought very highly of the individual, and we're not really acknowledging that the success comes from the collective, and that a classroom is this incredible opportunity to weave different strengths and to see that. And I happen to be working with the Ministry of Education, and I'm starting to see them understanding that for all learners. But now we're seeing, but we've got the research about streaming that shows that it is so incredibly bad for Māori, and that is, that is something that we shouldn't just be accepting. We really need to move hard on this, because, we need to find alternatives that can really bring the classroom into a really amazing new space where all the different needs are able to be met. So we are joined today by 3 teaching professionals who have a lot of experience. They've been paying quite a lot of attention to streaming. Misbah Sadat is the headmaster of Onslow College. We're also going to hear from Viv Thompson, who's a primary mathematics facilitator, and Kelsey, deputy principal at Hastings Girls High School. So we'll start with Misbah and we're going to hear from them for 10 minutes. And then, as they are talking, if you have questions, please pop them in the Q&A. We'll be looking at that and bringing those questions through at the end to for anyone to answer. So if you have a particular question for someone, that would be great. Okay.
Hey, aroha mai, Megan.
Hi, Piripi.
I think we're going to go back and listen to.
Apologies.
Yeah, I think you skipped.
Apologies.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry. So apologies. The rangatahi, we're going to hear from them again. They're going to talk to us about the problem. They're going to explain the streaming to us. They're going to explain to us some of the solutions. So I'll pass back over. I think I'm passing to Tonee. Tonee, is that right? Kāpai.
Kia ora, Megan. Yes, tēnā tātou. Again, we're going to give you a bit of a description, bit of a definition around what streaming is. So just so we all get that base knowledge, really, I think. So also known as tracking or ability grouping, streaming is a discriminatory practice used in schools to group students by their perceived ability level, with Māori and Pasifika students being overrepresented in the low stream classes. Here we can draw on a few similarities with America, where ability grouping is actually a mechanism used to resegregate schools and separate the white students from the black students. In New Zealand, we have the cabbage class, where there are less challenging tasks and reduced content learned at a slower rate and lower teacher expectations. So on the opposite end of that, we have the extension class. This is where they learn at a much quicker rate, higher teacher expectations, and much better access to learning resources. In this system, success is measured purely on a grade you receive, leaving students to judge themselves solely on that grade. So this streaming can begin as early as primary school. An example being where teachers place students in reading groups and title them things like the turtle group and the tiger group. This changes their mentality to believe that they're slow readers, and by this point, it's too late and the damage is already done. Another component of streaming is prerequisites, which I had a problem with actually, where students are required to sit certain paces before others. This can restrict what students wish to study and limit their potential options for the future. And finally, we have careers advisors. Now, careers advisors often have a pretty difficult role to play. They're tasked with guiding students down a path towards their futures. And also often Māori and Pacific students are labelled as labourers or tradies. And though there's nothing wrong with these careers, many students miss out on other pathways they may hold interest in, such as IT, science, and numerous others. So, kia ora, I'll pass it on to Kai to explain a few of the impacts around streaming. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Tonee. So I'm going to cover some of the impacts of streaming, and first I want to point out that streaming impacts all 4 dimensions of te whare tapawhā. This means that a student's taha hingaro, mental well-being, taha tinana, physical well-being, and taha whānau, social well-being, and also taha wairoa, spiritual well-being, are all impacted by streaming. Streaming creates a hierarchy within the classroom that looks and feels like a lower, middle, and upper class education structure. This structure is culturally segregating, which inherently produces outputs of a racist mindset and unfair practices. Our communities and lifestyles are shaped by these levels of class or income, and I do not believe we need to be installing such damaging concepts within our tamariki so young. Also, being streamed can create a social divide among students, as students are constantly streamed into low or high classes, can feel their social groups are being defined by their perceived abilities, and it makes it harder to have a diverse group of friends. This affects the taha whānau aspect of hauora. Even for the top students, they face the pressure of constantly keeping up top grades and instead challenged with the anxiety and stress of staying at the top. Extension classes create social isolation and cultural divide among tauira, as this also has a negative impact to their hauora. With 1 in 5 young people diagnosed with anxiety and depression in New Zealand, we need to be more aware of the harmful environment streaming creates in schools. Streaming can negatively impact all dimensions of te whare tapawhā because if one wall is weakened, the whole house is impacted, leaving a student feeling unmotivated, not worthy, and unable to fulfill their potential. No matter what colour skin you have or what level of learning you are at, streaming is negatively impacting on any child's education. And now I'll pass it on to Giahnnii to speak to you about some alternatives.
Yeah, kia ora tātou. Yeah, so now we understand what and why streaming has negative outcomes for our Indigenous people. So what are alternatives that could replace streaming? So Hastings Girls High School, with Catherine's from, which she'll talk about more, has shared their experience with their streaming alternative. And we've also noticed that primary schools play a big part in the kaupapa as well. So the streaming team here in Christchurch took a long drive down to Waitaki Valley Primary School to find out about their approach to de-stream. So teachers here found that ability grouping was not effective at all for all students. So Natalie, a maths teacher here, explained her alternative to ability grouping, which was flexi grouping. She explains that this alternative enhances students' capabilities. For example, in flexi groups, the so-called smarter students benefit from the opportunity to develop real-world problem skills. And as for struggling students in the class, their engagement in the class increased and they gained the collective support from their peers to succeed more. However, Natalie does express a concern for when students transition into secondary schools. So in the secondary sector, Hastings Girls principal and senior leadership team decided to make their school an unstreamed institution. However, this was not an easy feat, as they found there was some resistance from maths teachers. But however, through the support from a PLD facilitator and teacher workshops, they were able to move forward with de-streaming. So by creating alternatives to streaming, we see that flexi ability teaching works. PLD and PLD workshops are essential for teachers, and rangatahi voice is a must. These alternatives are based off of regional approaches as well. So in an analogy around weather, streaming serves as rain, and regional alternatives serves as umbrellas. And in different regions, rain will be more present than others. So the type of umbrella for each region will be different. The facts show that within each regional approach, each requires a different solution to make de-streaming effective and bring equity for everyone. I'll pass it back to Megan. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I think we're just going to hear from Piripi, who's going to talk to us about some shifts in attitudes that are required. Piripi, handing over to you.
Oh, kia ora everybody. Ngā mihi, ko Piripi Prendergast taku ingoa, Ngāti Pākehā te iwi. I also work for Tokona Te Raki here in Christchurch. What I was going to talk very briefly about today is about the importance of mindsets and the importance of messaging. And I think if I start by using an analogy with COVID, it might be helpful. We all understand that the more people who get vaccinated, it benefits everybody. And we've done very well getting that low-hanging fruit vaccinated, but now we're looking at those top branches in the tree. And I think we're starting to realize that there are many different categories. It's not just one variety of fruit, there are many varieties of fruit at that top of the tree, and realizing we've got to work with each quite differently. I was listening to Harry Tam on the radio this morning, and he was talking about working with gang communities and was saying we have to first understand the whakapapa of those communities, their experiences, why they're mistrustful of authority, and only then can we start to work out who's best to engage, what the messaging is, how, and so on. And there are many different other categories. We could talk about those who have needle phobias and so on. And I think this analogy is useful when you pass it over to streaming. We can change the system. That's relatively easy, but what's going to be more difficult is changing the mindsets of those people involved in terms of streaming. And again, just like the tree with that sort of high-hanging fruit. There are many different categories and groups within the streaming discussion. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. We know that for parents of, or some parents of students who are in top ability groups or extension groups, for them, that is what they see as the best thing for their child. And they're adamant it's got to stay like that. And we know, they put up a battle to keep that. So how are we going to understand their mindsets, their thinking, engage with them, which is so important. I remember Catherine talking about this to me last year. We have to engage with those people and tailor our messaging to them. Otherwise, we end up in situations where they want to hire buses and take their students to another school. And again, within teachers, we know that there's groups of teachers who are adamant, absolutely adamant, that streaming is the best thing for the students they have. And they'll fight tooth and nail for that. And often it's quite damaging in a staff room where they're possibly undermining changes that are taking place. But we have to understand them, and we've got to engage with them, tailor our messaging to them. We know that you can change the system, but for some teachers, still that mindset is there that, they see some students can do maths, some students can't do maths, and that's the end of it. And we've got to work with those ones. And so that's my important, I think we haven't really talked a lot about mindsets and the importance of different messaging to these groups. And I think in some ways you can liken it to paddling a waka or rowing a little rowboat, and you're pulling hard on those oars, putting the sweat into it, but out the back you're dragging an anchor which is holding the progress back. And if we can start to work on these, engaging with these other groups, then we'll lighten that weight on that anchor, and we'll be able to make much faster progress, much easier and less sweat to it. So that is my kōrero. Hoki atu ki a koe, Megan. Thank you all. Kia ora koutou.
Ngā mihi, Piripi, thank you very much for that provocation. I think that, we need to really put ourselves into a mindset of curiosity in order to approach this, because I imagine that there's some people on this call who are not yet convinced that this is the way forward. They may have children in school. They might, have some questions about how that we would even transition to a new model. And obviously, this is new. This is a new inquiry for us in Aotearoa. So the roadmap isn't clear, but together here, the people who show up for this conversation are the people who are helping to find the way forward. So ngā mihi to all of you, especially to the rangatahi who just shared. And now I'm going to do what I was trying to do before, way too early, and bring in our wonderful professionals who have personal experience of this. And I'm going to hand you over first to Misbah Sadat, the principal of Onslow High School. No, I'm not going to.
I'm the assistant principal.
Assistant.
Not principal, who would not want that job.
Ha! All right, over to you.
Ko thar toku karaha, ko Arabian toku moana, ko Anwar toku matua, ko Nurjahan toku whaia, ko Adam toku hoarangatera, ko Maya rawa ko maha aku mahanga, ko Misbah Sadat toku enua no Karachi ahau, ko Kare te owaipa hihi toku kura, ko Onslow toku kura. I'm the assistant principal at Onslow College, and I just started there at the beginning of this year. Before that, I was at Horofinwa College for 4 years as the head of mathematics there. And before that, I was at Paraku College for 6 or 7 years. At Paraku College, the year 11 classes, it was a streamed school. Maths was streamed. The year 11 classes were the traditional 3 level of classes that most of the schools and maths departments have in the country. When I became the head of maths and came to Horowhenua College, I think that's when I really realized that what we were doing was not right. Because when we looked at in a high decile school where our Māori and Pasifika population is very low, it is easy to forget that most of them are actually put in the lower streamed classes. But when you go to a school that is 47% Māori and about, or 37% Māori and about 13% Pasifika, and you look at the top classes and see how much it's full of Pākehā, then you realize there is something that perhaps is not right. As a woman myself, who has a degree in theoretical mathematics from the University of Maryland, and as somebody who's a mother of daughters, I also believe that streaming the top classes actually don't really work for girls. It really undermines their belief in themselves. So why am I here? I'm here because I'm passionate about mathematics being accessible to every single person. I'm here because I absolutely believe that every single person is capable of achieving calculus minimum to year 13, if not more, if they so want. When I joined Horowhenua College, I decided to teach what they had, the lower maths class. And the kids that I saw, I had about 15 to 16 kids in that class. And the kids that I saw, I think there were maybe 2 or 3 that genuinely had learning support needs. The rest were there because they had at some point in their lives been badly behaved. They were disengaged. There was absolutely nothing wrong with their brains. The head of English, Claire McCormick, was also teaching lower class in English, and we both sat together and we both decided we didn't want to do this anymore. We collected evidence that year because we scrapped the numeracy program that had been placed for them by unit standards, and I decided that I was going to teach them exactly what was being taught in the top maths class to see how they would cope. It was very difficult for me to convince these kids that they had the ability, because they had been told all their lives that they were bad in mathematics, and so they had a glass ceiling on top of them. So the head of English and I decided, okay, we've tried this, and yes, we've gotten quite ahead, but we went and spoke to our principal and our SLT, Grant Congdon, that for 2018, so I joined there 2017, this was our journey 2017, and we decided in 2018 that we did not want to have streamed year 11 classes. When you're a head of department, you do not have any power over the junior classes because that is timetabling and the SLT controls it. But a head of department has a huge amount of power over senior classes. And therefore, even though we had streaming in year 9 and 10, we decided we were only going to have one year 11 class. So we went to our principal and our SLT team, our deputy principal, Sharon Morkirk and Jason White, and we said we wanted to stop streaming. And we gave them the evidence to show them that these kids, even though they were not willing to engage with algebra at that time, because they had had such terrible experiences in their classes before that, that we were still able to convince the SLT that we think this is a good plan and we wanted to see where these kids could go. We also had a lot of neuroscience evidence behind us telling us that brains develop at different rates. And just because somebody couldn't do a STEL test or PAD test in year 9 or 10 or 7 or 8, it doesn't mean that their brains won't develop over time. And we absolutely cannot predict someone's potential. We were very lucky that our senior management was, they were risk takers and they were willing to come along with us on our journey. I think if you don't have a supportive SLT who 100% are with you on this because things could be really bad, then we might be not looking at. So anyway, so that was our journey. And Megan, are you saying my 10 minutes are up? Yes. So, so we started that journey and we did quite a bit to change our pedagogy and change use and the grade guidelines. And therefore, we went on this journey and we really increased our numbers in calculus. We increased our numbers for math engagement in mathematics, but we also really decreased social barriers between kids. Yeah, that's a journey.
Apologies, Misbah, I might have just pulled you a little bit earlier. Is there anything else that you wanted to say as part of your kōrero before we move on? Actually, there's a question here for you. Did you write up your results and publish them? You're on mute.
Yes, because we published our data at Education Gazette. When I left, we had about 90% of our kids were doing at least a minimum of one external assessment. I can tell you that the 4 things that you need to start this journey is A, you have to believe the kids can do it. If you don't believe the kids can do it, they're not going to do it. 2, you have to have a supportive SLT. You have to have a team that absolutely believes in equity. And 4, when you decide on this journey, it does take a lot of planning. You have to use technology, but also we decided as a team that we will not blame the kids. It didn't matter what happened. We were not going to blame the kids for a whole year. We were not going to say it's the kids' fault. Every single time that we came up with a challenge, we asked ourselves, how are we going to solve it? And without blaming the kids. And that's really, I think, why we happened to succeed the way we had. But also you have to change that. You have to change your school guidelines, which is of deadlines and testing everyone at the same time. You have to follow NZQA guidelines. You can't stop streaming if you're going to test every single person. Term 1, week 6, spell 5 or period 5. Doesn't work that way.
That's absolutely fantastic, Misbah. Thank you. I'm sure that generated a lot of questions. I have a big invitation. I want your hardest questions. I want your most difficult ones, the ones that are really niggling in the back of your minds, the doubts that you have about this working, because these are the people who can help to answer that. So I'm going to pass on now to Viv Thompson, who calls herself a facilitator in the mathematics curriculum. So let's hear from you, Viv, about your experiences. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora te whānau, ko Viv Thompson toko ingoa. So a little bit about me, you might sort of wonder who am I and what would I know. So I was a primary teacher for 20 years and I trained after I had children, so it wasn't straight after leaving school. And I've been a facilitator at the Education Support Services as part of the Otago University College of Education for 10 years. And so it's been my role to work with schools, and it was lovely to hear your story, Giahnnii, about visiting Waitaki Valley. And I've been working with Waitaki Valley for since the beginning of 2020. I work from home, which is in the beautiful central Otago, and you might have seen me disappear before because my internet suddenly went AWOL. So if it goes AWOL, I'll switch over to my phone. And a couple of years ago, Piripi and I had a conversation at one of our hui, and we were just talking about streaming. And I said, yes, we know streaming is bad, or streaming has great consequences, but it is no use just saying that. We need to support teachers and show them a different way. And so thinking about the primary setting, and I've noticed in the chat there that people say, well, ability grouping starts at primary, and yes, it does. The New Zealand primary system has been very much based on grouping, We've got reading groups and writing groups and maths groups. And so what I've been trying to work with is looking at how we can provide more flexible grouping. Sometimes, and it's particularly so in maths, children are grouped at the beginning of the year, and that can be maybe from results from the year before or what the teacher sees. And I heard someone talk about, you know, sometimes you have the tigers and the turtles, and it really doesn't matter what you call the group. You can call them Einsteins, whatever. Children know which group they are in, and they, you know, they can rank themselves, you know, very much from that. So, and sometimes these groups are decided from assessment tasks like Misbah was talking about. So what my role has been is for schools to try different styles of grouping. So the styles of grouping that we've been working with schools is to try with mixed ability grouping, to work with peers, to try with half the class. But really it's working with teachers to teach the children on need. And so to get away from the fixed ability grouping, we work with teachers to start with an open-ended question. So that's a question that's accessible to all the students, but there are a variety of answers. And what we're interested in is what the children say. And one of my big jobs is to get teachers to be quiet and to get teachers to listen to what the students are saying. There's a reference paper called Talk Moves, which I've sent to Anne, which people might, that'll be on the website that Anne will be able to pass on. And that's a method where teachers, they work with putting a question out there, listening to the, you know, and leaving it quiet for a while for students to think. We're not interested in, is not interested in who's got the first answer, fastest answer, which is often what so many people think maths is about. It's having the answer fast, it's having the answer first. So it's looking at, you know, really opening up maths. So having an open-ended question where children just have a chance to talk about it. So they'll talk to someone beside them, and it's whoever happens to be beside them, not, you know, particular grouping. And then they've had a chance to rehearse their answer and a time to share it, and then they get to feedback, but it isn't a hands up feedback. The children, you know, often in a class, a child will race to put their hand up and the other kids think, oh yeah, okay, rightio. Viv's answering, so I might as well just be quiet. And so getting the children, you know, to listen to each other and, you know, to add on, to repeat, to revoice, really valuing the answers that students give. And from there, then we would get the teachers to group the children so that it's from need. And what I mean is from an open-ended question, it might be that you find a group of students, oh, they're having difficulty with division. Okay, so you might have, you know, Viv, Piripi, Misbah, Giahnnii, you know, I noticed that in that problem, we had a bit of a problem with division. So if you come here and anyone else who would like to learn a bit more. And so it's a to and fro between having problem solving, but also direct teaching. And so we're trying to shift schools from the concept of, I'm going to teach you the concept, like today we are learning about division, or today we are learning about doubling and halving fractions, is to have an open-ended question which elicits the responses there. So rather than teaching the concept and hope the child answers the question and then in various tests answers the questions, in that particular way, it's actually sort of turning it around. So as a PLD facilitator, I've worked, this is a multi-pronged thing. Talk moves is one of the things that we look at, but it's also looking at, so what's the background? Maths can be, it can become quite a dry subject where we just focus on number and being fast and basic facts, and certain things are valued, but it's opening and looking at all of mathematics. And if we look at the New Zealand curriculum, it says at the top of the maths pages that children will be involved in solving problems which require them to, and then there's the objectives there. But sometimes teachers aren't confident in maths. And so it's working with the teachers to increase their confidence across maths. For some reason, there can be quite a lot of maths anxiety. And we look at research, and one of the people who we use quite a lot is Professor Jo Bowler, who's the Professor of Mathematics Education at Stanford University. And she has done a huge amount of work on maths anxiety and what that does. We all know that if you're anxious about something, then your brain goes into neutral. You just cannot remember. So we look a lot at her work and have ideas that help teachers to break down that anxiety that children have, and also that they have. We look at the learning progression framework, which is part of the progress and consistency tools. And looking at that, it looks at all the strands of maths, looks at the different aspects, and that increases the teacher knowledge and understanding of mathematics. And it's right from, the first progression at school, and it goes through to level 5. And it's important that we look right across, not just at our little bit, say we take year 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 1 or 2, so that we really understand where the children come from and where they're going to go. I was listening to a ministry presentation on Tuesday, and the curriculum refresh is looking at these progressions as well, rather than being quite so tied to curriculum levels. So the progressions are certainly something that it's good to have a look at. And the good thing about the progressions is the teachers can see from the key ideas and key concepts there, they can see where the children are, and also the next step. And the signposts focus on key understandings and the big ideas. So this is helping to take the busyness away from teaching, like this group's doing this and that group's doing that, and you're organising this group. It's focusing on the big ideas and also how that relates in real life. And there are several supports there. The website NZ Maths, NIMSA or ERU, you might know it as, and ARBS have really helpful links to help teachers in this work. Also, what's incredibly important is these questions, these open-ended questions, need to be in a context which is relevant to the cultural experiences of the group that's in front of the teacher, not some made-up example that may be, something that I might be interested in, but what is, what is relevant to the students that are in front of the teacher. I've got here, so we work on decreasing maths anxiety of both teachers and students. Because I bet if I was to ask a maths question, I suppose we've got maths teachers here, but if I was to ask a maths question now, some people might suddenly, the eye contact goes, they may feel not confident, they may not want to put themselves out there because of the feeling that there's a right and a wrong answer. So it's, it's a multi-pronged, as all teaching is, it's in a very complex, it's a very complex business is the word that's coming to mind, not the right word. But to get change, we have to have leadership on board. when I'm working in a school, if the leadership is not behind the professional development, then it doesn't really happen. It happens when I'm there and there's pockets of change, but it's really important to get the whole team working towards. And you may have found that when you went to Waitaki Valley, that the teachers worked together and the principal supported them in their learning, realising that it's not easy and that making change isn't easy. But what the teachers often find is that making that change, as I said before, takes the busyness out of the teaching. And when you're focusing on the big ideas and what the students are showing in front of you, and also looking at the next steps, and there are plenty of resources there to help with that. So when we're looking at changing this, we can't just beat people about the head and say that it's bad. There has to be ways of changing. And for this, we need plenty of PLD. Not that I'm touting for business, but the current PLD system can be difficult where individual schools apply. What's PLD? Professional Learning and Development. I just see a wee question there. So in order to get change, we have to have a team working together, and that team is the school, it's the whānau, it's leadership, it's PLD. It needs to come from a variety of connections. So I think that's probably about me.
Ngā mihi, Viv, thank you so much for taking us through your hit list of places to start, to really start making a change, especially in that in the maths curriculum. I'm sure that people have, in fact, I know they can see that there's lots more questions. People want to know about this in greater detail. So what we'll do after this is we'll gather up some of the sources that you're referring to, some of the research, and we'll make sure that that goes out in some communications with everyone afterwards. However, we still have our Q&A coming up, so don't forget to add your hard questions into that. And just for anyone who might have missed at the beginning, the Q&A is different from the chat. So if your burning question is sitting in the chat, it may not be answered. You'll need to go up to the Q&A button, which is at the top of the screen, and pop your request in there. Now, we're not done. We have yet to hear from Catherine Kelsey, who is the deputy at Hastings Girls High School. We've heard a little bit about her work earlier from the rangatahi, but we're going to get to hear about the whole journey to where they are now. So Catherine, ngā mihi nui, please take it away.
Kia ora, Megan. Kia ora koutou. Ko ex me te maunga, ko ex te awa, no Inerangi ahu, ko Richard toko papa, ko Eribati toko mama, ko Simon toko tama, ko Catherine Kelsey toko ingoa, ko Tumuaki Tarua, Hastings Girls High School. And I just would like to say, before I start our story, that I'm here as part of Hastings Girls High School, but I just want to tautoko the courage and strength of our principal, our SLT, our HODs, and our teachers, because this was done by everybody together. And so my voice is here really, but it's for all of us at the school who led this journey. And I'd really like to tautoko the young people who spoke today, because our students have got the courage now to speak, but it takes a lot of courage to speak about your experiences. So ka pai, kia ora. So I'm going to take you, I think, on a journey really from really severe streaming, that it was the worst kind of destructive and dangerous systematic racism, through a 3-year journey to a school where next year our students are actually selecting their own classes and sorting themselves. So it's been quite a journey, but it's really exciting. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we put in place, because one of the things that I think we need to unpack a bit more is that if you focus on the taking away of streaming, what you forget is that you actually need to focus on what is curriculum, what is teaching, and what is equity and excellence for all students, and how do you design a curriculum, particularly a knowledge-rich, locally placed junior curriculum for students. And you need to focus on that, and then the removal of streaming is easier, much easier, because that you've got something really exciting for students to take part in. When I was at Westlake Boys High School in Auckland, I also taught for 4 years at a Decile 10 primary school in Auckland. And so I had a lot of experience of streaming, and I didn't really see much of the damage of it. But when I went to be the deputy principal at Hastings Girls High School, which is 67% Māori and 20% Pasifika, I was really blown away. Our top class were the Pakeha girls, and then what had been created was a diligence class, which funny enough was much of a similar colour. And I'll never forget a Māori student in one of my classes saying to me, "Oh, well, I was told I could go into that class, but I'm not going to. I don't want to. It's really uncomfortable. I feel really uncomfortable. Why would I want to be in there?" The students would arrive on the first day at Hastings Girls, and they were piped in, not even a pōwhiri, and they spent the morning in the hall where they sat 3 hours of examinations, the old tests that used to be taken, and then the teachers marked them, and the girls came back the next day and they were streamed. So if you imagine that they'd already come from primary schools and intermediate schools, as Christine Ruby Davis has talked about, and others, that they'd already come with really perhaps complex ideas about their own learning. That was their first experience, their first day at Hastings Girls. So from then on, really, there were 2 groups of students in the school, and I think that's really important, and that is, and Tonee has talked about this, the destructive nature of streaming. From day one in year 9, they were either the students that could learn and who were on a pathway with high quality teaching, university as a future. They were given achievement standards, and they were given the taonga of knowledge. And then there was the bulk of the rest of the school, pretty much all of whom were Pasifika and Māori, who were on a can't pathway. They can't do this, they can't write, they can't do this. And very quickly were put into unit standard courses with low level teaching, low expectations, and they were denied that taonga of knowledge. And they were not entered in exams, they were not even entered in achievement standards in KMAR. And it was just really the worst kind of streaming, so that I've ever come across. And I think we need to acknowledge the awful damage that the decile system has done to schools. Because of the awful impact of poverty and colonialism, obviously a lot of the lower decile schools like Hastings Girls have got a high proportion of Māori students. And the awful mythologizing that has gone with that decile system, that means that students themselves have already constructed their own self-mythology about that they're not good at anything, and they suck at school, and school's not for them. That brings the behavior issues, because they're taught with low-level teaching that is not interesting or engaging. They're taught with deficit attitudes, and this becomes all about the student's problem and the community's problem. And I had never been in a staff room where I'd heard people talk about the students in this way. So it was quite mind-blowing. And I think the decile system has a huge impact on why streaming has carried on in New Zealand and what it has brought with it. So our journey, Piripi was right. You can't change only mindset or only the system. You have to change both. So you have to change the mindset and the system, and you have to do it collectively. It doesn't mean that you're all here, you're all like got the same mindset. So staff in a school will still have a huge range of mindsets, but you've got to change from can't to can. So we can all have an impact if we do this together. And if we do this together, then it needs to be done deliberately and well planned. And we need to have a vision of where we're actually going, not that we're taking away streaming, but we're actually going somewhere really exciting with curriculum that means we don't need streaming, and this doesn't work, and it's not what we want. So we did a lot of PD around Kristen Ruby Davis's work, Hattie, Jenny Donahue's work on collective efficacy, and worked a lot, because the senior leadership team were right behind this, we worked a lot with the head of departments as well. And our head of maths actually comes from Uruguay, so she had never come across streaming before. She couldn't believe it. She was horrified that we did this to kids. And she talked about society in Uruguay and how important it was that everybody was learning together. So it wasn't long before the HOD team actually were ready, and we basically stopped entrance testing in year 8. We took away streaming in the junior school, and we took away streaming in the senior school, and we did it all in 1 year, and we just did it. And that's really confronting for your community, and you have to have a lot of courage. So you do need to have a well-researched and well-communicated plan, and you do need to have a really deliberate PD plan for teachers, and you need to stick to that. We had all our courses turned into achievement standard courses, and all students entered. We looked at Mātauranga Māori knowledge and bringing that into senior curriculum, and we started talking pathways and excellence into our students. So all our conversations are, what do you want to do? What's your pathway? So what subjects are going to help you do that? How can we help you to get there? And we no longer talked about students not being able to do things or not being able to get to places. This was supported with we instigated a PD slot in which we did a lot of work with differentiation, scaffolding, enrichment. We had Margaret Ross in to talk about restorative practice in schools. We worked with Bill Hamilton on the Treaty of Waitangi. So one piece of advice I would give is that you get your experts in to help you and your staff. That's really, really important. We had a really clear vision, and the clear vision came from our principal and with the constructed with the staff, that our girl is at the centre, that she can achieve in her own identity, she can achieve excellence, and she can achieve the pathway that she wants to go, but it's our girl at the centre. And if you know her story, then you will be able to better help her prepare for her future. The really important thing is that you must have a vision of a curriculum, because that's what excites parents and excites students. Our principal had done a lot of work with curriculum, and she had a strong vision of a redesigned junior curriculum. And we have been piloting junior learning hubs where students choose their junior class. So we don't even have year 9 and 10 now. They choose their junior class for the year based around a strength or a passion. So they sort themselves, we don't sort them. So we started with Design and Innovation Hub, Engineering Your Future, and physical activity. And next year we're going to 16 hubs in our junior school. And I'm not going to talk too much about that because that goes now into curriculum design, but people have worried about parents. Parents are really important. I just had parents in. If they wanted to talk, they came in, and you'd scratch the surface and it would be about behaviour and was their Pākehā daughter going to, but you just had to keep talking and providing the information and bring them in. Don't be scared of them, because you can't have a tail wagging a dog, when you know it's wrong. So they choose their passion area. So, and our Engineering Your Future Hub is not an elite, those that are good at science and maths. And I'll never forget a young Māori student saying to me in year 9, she said, I didn't even know that people thought like I thought. And she had selected that hub because she was really interested in that. And we built a really strong curriculum around that particular passion. And then, you can look on our website at how that works and what is there. I think the success was because we had something really strong to put in place. And our role has grown as a result. People are really excited by the curriculum. They want to come to the school. So that kind of helped us get past that difficult conversation around parents. So what about the outcomes? So our maths results were going backwards in the old system. The data didn't prove that streaming worked anyway. We have been working with a numeracy PLD provider, and our maths results at the moment actually are showing the biggest amount of progress that we've ever had with junior students. So learning maths through a lens of a passion that you're interested in is clearly the way forward. I have girls now in level 2 who are getting excellence endorsement, talking about going to university, who are in the lowest stream class in year 9. They're the last group through. Puhoro STEM came the other day and they said, we're going to talk to your year 10s. So first thing we're going to tell them that it doesn't matter what stream they're in. And I said, well, they won't understand what you're talking about. They have no idea what streaming is. It's because our last streamed year is going into year 13 next year. And they were sort of gobsmacked, but the girls really had no idea what they were talking about. And we have really no behaviour issues. I mean, I don't want to go into that kind of data, but at the moment, our stand down data has completely changed, and we have almost no behaviour issues. So I think a lot of people have talked about behaviour. Behaviour is connected with learning. And if you are being told that you're stupid and you're a cabbage and you can't learn, and you're being given colouring in, and really, you know, of course you're not going to behave. I mean, I wouldn't. So you really do have to stop talking about that and start talking about what you're going to put in place and what you need to do for your students. And I'll leave you with the one thing. We had our student leader speeches in the hall this week. And when I arrived, all the student leaders were Pākehā. I saw Māori students get up who'd come from low stream class and talk to everybody about how important their culture was and why they wanted to lead in the school. That to me is one of the biggest markers of the impact of taking away streaming and speaking excellence into students and working with them at their pace, but telling them that they jolly well can do any achievement standard they set their heart to, and they can do any pathway. So I'll leave you with that. So I know you've probably got lots of questions.
Whoa, Catherine, that was awesome. Everyone is really fizzing. It's so wonderful. I mean, to talk about, you know, that we're changing the minds and the system. We've got to do that collectively, that we, you know, we need to get in the experts to help with the staff, that we have to have an open door with the parents and just keep the corridor open, answer their hard questions, give them the information that they need, that you need a vision, and that you need to have something strong to put in place to rally people around, to get people excited, to move them through the difficult parts, because it does sound like a huge amount of effort went in this. But I just particularly, for me, loved this concept of learning maths through the lens of a passion, because there's so many of us who maths was the barrier to feeling like you could, you know, function at all in society. So, but we've all got a passion. So what a fantastic place to start. And then there was also such excitement around this behaviour is communication, and that we need to stop talking about behaviour and start talking instead about what we're going to put in place. So that was a really amazing kōrero from our three panelists, and I'll include in the panel discussion Piripi, because he is holding so much of this research and the relationship with the ministry. So there's the question I probably will kick off with is like a cry for help. If we stop streaming, how do we teach across the levels 1 to 6 of the curriculum in one lesson lasting 45 minutes? It's very much a how-to. So does anyone want to kick off that question?
Can I ask Viv and particularly Misbah both to comment on that one?
Well, the simple answer is you can't. You can't hope to cover all that. But I think it's focusing on what's the big idea of what it is that you're trying, that, you know, whatever curriculum area that you're looking at, it's focusing on that and finding out what the children do know. Sometimes if we're only asking in a particular way, say we're asking in a test, like Catherine was talking about, how the children all filed in, then we will find an answer, but it may not be what the children are thinking. So it's listening to what the students say and then looking at the next steps. But it's not an easy fix. It's looking at, so say I was looking at, you know, teaching fractions, then it's finding out it's a bit hard to describe really. It's finding out what they know. The learning progression framework that I was talking about gives you a really good start of just ideas of where the children are and then next steps to take them. But you cannot, if you've across 6 areas, if you've got 6 levels, you cannot teach each group differently in a 45-minute period, but it's something that takes a huge amount of time.
So at for Whenua College, the first 2 years when I was there, I didn't have an assistant HOD, but in my 3rd year I got one. And what I asked him to do was to look at our achievement objectives in the curriculum. And from there, we built, using TKI and other resources, we built a I Can Do sheet for all the 8 strands. And I'm very happy to share them with anyone who wants them. I can ask Anne to put my email up. And then what we did was when we had those, so we had the achievement objectives, we put them in every classroom, and then we had the I Can Do sheet, which literally had all the skills up to, we broke it down in curriculum level 3, 4, 5, and 6. And what he did that year for me was that, well, for us, was that he went and met with all the other head of departments, because inadvertently we did not want to not teach something that maybe was going to be really useful for somebody else. So we went and spoke to geography and science and English and just about every single department, and came up with a whole list of what we could not cut short. And then we did do quite a bit of collaboration. The one thing that we did was that we worked collaboratively as a team. So for example, if we were going to teach in year 11, or, for example, if you're teaching Craig, we decided that each one of us was going to look at a unit plan, and each one of us took a skill and made a video of that skill. So none of us were reinventing the wheel. All of us worked collaboratively, and it was really good. So I think if you're really down this journey, it's the first year is hard. If you have a collaborative team, it's fine. And yes, we made a lot of mistakes and we learned from them. But after that first, I would say after the first year, the second year is about tweaking, and then 3rd and 4th, you've got a lot of resources. And a lot of it, really helped us inadvertently, because for example, when we had, we didn't have, like, for example, our Google Classroom wasn't for teachers, it was for topics. And therefore every single teacher put in the, questions or resources and a video on that one skill. And what happened with that was that actually inadvertently, all the kids got to know those teachers. And so there was no more talk of, oh, I want this teacher or this teacher is good, because when they went on the following year, they'd actually been taught by everybody, not just the teacher in front. So, so there's a lot of ways to do this.
Kia ora for that. Was there another point you wanted to make?
Yeah, I was a bit reluctant about student choice in maths, and at that young age, because a lot of the kids come to us. The national stats tell us that about 67% of the kids coming into year 9 maths have something negative to say about mathematics. So if you ask them to choose, they're going to try and run away from maths more, the really hardcore maths. So we made it mandatory. We did a lot of mentoring and pathways, but I actually made it, I didn't engage with the MCAT. I made my own test for algebra, and that was good enough for year 12. But what I did do was that I made it mandatory for every single person to learn algebra at year 11, because how many of us become older and we want to take a different pathway, and algebra was going to become a gatekeeper. And I did not want to be that gatekeeper, because I think it's immoral to tell a child what they can or cannot do. But I could say to them, I don't care if you don't want to test on it. I don't care if you don't want to do this, but you've got to learn it. So at least you have that knowledge. In case you change your mind, we have something to base ourselves on. Yeah.
Kia ora, kia ora. So I'm going to move on to the next question. What is the Ministry of Education doing to support this mahi? Piripi, your whole relationship at the moment?
Kia ora, everybody. It's an opportune time really to talk a little bit more about the work that Tokona Taraki is doing. And over the last 4 years, really, we've been researching, trying to gather insights and understand streaming and the alternatives. Last year, we published Heawa Arado, and in that publication, we tracked 70,000, almost 80,000 young Māori transitioning from school to work. And that's one of the things that came up with, was that streaming was a barrier to Māori progressing as should to successful career pathways. This year we published Ending Streaming in Aotearoa. And what took us almost by surprise really was that we had a meeting arranged, or a visit, from both the ministry and the Mātauranga Iwi Leaders Group. And they both came to us early in the year and said, look, we'd like the move away from streaming, which is ministry policy, of course. We'd like this to be a collaborative process, and we're asking, would you take on that mantle of leading it, which is a huge responsibility for us. And so we've been working closely with the ministry on this issue, and their approach really to this is collaborative. And since then, one of our first actions was, I think has already been mentioned, we called together all the stakeholder organisations, in fact, the leaders of those stakeholder organisations. We got an incredible response. Really, you name the organisation, they were there. So ERO, the ministry, iwi leaders, the trade unions, and so on. And out of that, we've come up with a design team, or we're bringing together a design team who's going to come up with the blueprint for ending streaming in Aotearoa. And we have our first meeting later this month, and we'll continue meeting over the next 10 months until we've got that blueprint done. But it's a big job. So I think, in some ways, I think the ministry is in a difficult position. Their policy is clearly that streaming should not be. You might have heard Chris Hipkins, Honourable Chris Hipkins, on television last year, I think it was on Marae, and he was emphatic that streaming is damaging, particularly to Māori and Pasifika students, and schools should stop doing that. And of course, we've got the new Education Act, the 2020 Education Act, which really indicates to schools that they should not be streaming. So the difficulty, I guess, for the ministry is that schools are self-governing and they make their own decisions based on their community. And that's where it becomes difficult. But again, it comes back to what I said earlier about mindsets, about engaging with people, about the right messaging, discussion, being open to listen to other people and other people's viewpoints. So I'll leave it with that. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Piripi. So someone has mentioned the PLD provided to their schools by Professor Christine Ruby-Davies. Piripi, did you want to follow up on that question?
I think there was another question that sort of ties in with that, and someone was asking about what research is available out there. And I'll just go through a couple of things that I've come across, and perhaps other people on the panel might be able to say what's useful to them. I know, Catherine, you've already touched on that. But Professor Christine Ruby-Davies is mentioned in the PLD. I would urge people to Google Newsroom, 27th of June, and the article in that publication by Professor Christine Ruby-Davies. And to me, of all the things I've read, it really is quite stunning, shocking. And she's talking about, as we know, young children entering primary school and very soon after being grouped. And I think Tonee mentioned this. But once they're in those ability groups, that's it. You know, they don't get out of them. They stay there. And once they get to high school, they're still down in those low ability classes, the cabbage classes. And I'm using that word cabbage because that's what students call them. I've heard Professor Bill Barton from Auckland University, the maths professor, talk and say the same things, that we have to wake up. You know, it's incredibly damaging to our nation as a whole, but particularly to Māori and Pasifika students, but to other students. And I heard Kaya talking about her son. And just in a very short article, Professor Christine Ruby Davies lays this out. So I would urge people to read that article. Just a couple of other things that spring to mind. On Sunday, is it the Royal Commission or not the Royal Commission, but the report on maths in New Zealand was released. And if you go into that, recommendation number 5 from that expert panel is that we shouldn't stream, but that also has a bibliography or reference section in there, which will take you to research. And gosh, Professor Bobby Hunter, I just came across a research piece that she's done about DIMIC and about ability grouping in maths and ending that. I found that very, very interesting. And there's some great stuff coming out of England. From memory, the names, I think there's a Francis, and gosh, the other name has gone out of my head. There's a whole set of authors, but we've actually put them up on this, I think on the website. We've been putting them in our pānui, links to the English research. It's a whole lot of things are coming out which are shining a light on what happens when you move away from streaming, and in particular that all students benefit. So I'll just pass across because other people on the panel might have something to add to that.
I mentioned Professor Jo Bowler from Stanford University. She has a website called YouCubed, YOUCUBED, Cubed, and it's a wonderful website. And on that website, it has a lot of the open-ended tasks that I was talking about, but it also has a lot of research articles, looking at fluency without fear, how ability grouping is damaging, looking at how children learn and how making mistakes is hugely important. And also people have talked about that anxiety, that maths anxiety. There are several resources there to build up with that, like maths. It's not about speed. It's not a performance. It's about depth. It's about making mistakes, and that's how we learn. So that's a really good website, YouCubed, and also Enrich, English, like Ian and Rich. That's similar. It has research articles and ideas for teaching to work. So a couple more ideas.
Did anyone else want to feed into that? Okay, there's actually a question here for Misbah. We're really keen to hear from you about how you changed the school pedagogy and what changes were you actually making to the curriculum?
I don't think I made changes to the curriculum. It's a very traditional. We used the traditional curriculum. We just changed the way we were. I think we changed the way we were teaching it, but we also changed the way we were assessing it. So technology is a huge friend of non-streaming. I think technology is a great equalizer, and this idea that we have that everything has to be done algebraically is actually not even required by the standards. So allowing students to use Desmos, to use graphical calculators, it actually piques their curiosity and they can explore a lot more. We spoke to NZQA and really understood what authenticity meant. And authenticity absolutely did not mean that they had to sit and do an internal in 2 hours and couldn't walk out of the room and couldn't talk to anyone about it or whatever. You have to know the kids. You have to be able to look at their work and know that's their work. If you think it's not their work, have a chat with them. If they can explain it to you, then it is their work. When we did our year 11 classes for 3 years, the classes were literally wherever the kids were going to be placed. So there were 6 lines, and there was a year 11 class on all the 6 lines. And depending on the options they chose, they just got put in wherever, whatever line fit for them. So we had kids who were really, really low, just operating in curriculum level 2, sitting with the same kids some kids who were operating literally at curriculum level 7. And so we learned how to differentiate and make resources for that differentiation. We had kids who were able to assess in 3 weeks of a new topic. So we weren't forcing them to wait up to an excellence level. We weren't forcing them to wait 6 weeks or whatever. And then we had kids who actually needed maybe 8 weeks to learn a standard, and that was perfectly fine. And what it did for us was that if you assess kids when they are ready, which is what NZQS says, kids actually don't cheat, because they go and sit in front of that paper, or they start that assessment with a huge amount of confidence, because they know they can absolutely achieve it to the best of their ability. So we got away with that whole idea of assessing everyone at the same time, and deadlines. I don't know, even now I teach the 2, it pains me to say it, the 2 bottom classes at Onslow, watch that space. But the first thing I did was I don't have deadlines in my classes, and I don't have seating plans for my classes. The kids sit where they want. So there's a lot of conversation in the class. And I think the other thing that we did was that if you get your team behind you, if you really explain the why you're doing it and how it would impact and what we're doing it for, your team will be behind you. I think teachers are afraid because they think it's a lot more work, and they don't know how they're going to do behavior. And Catherine's absolutely right. We did not have a single behavior. I did not have to send out a single kid in our year 11 class once we did non-streaming. So the kids were motivated because they were with kids who were motivated. So that's just a short answer, but I'm happy to chat with anyone who wants to contact me at a later stage.
Thank you so much, Misbah. Catherine, did you just want to, before we wrap up, we're on 8:30, did you have an insight for people about where to start? If there was, if there's like one thing I can do, or where, there's lots of different pathways here, where do you think people should start?
Gosh, that's a really huge question for a brief insight. I think you have to start by challenging your own mindset. Yeah. You really do, because we're, most of us, educators. Therefore, mostly if we came through stream schools, we were probably in those top classes, or we loved learning. So you've actually got to challenge your own mindset about your mythologizing that might be happening subconsciously about your Māori students or about learning. You've got to stop thinking that students are either good at something or not. Intelligence is something we grow in our head. No one's born bright or not bright. I mean, it's just, you've got to challenge all that inside your own mindset. And you've got to get to know your students and get to know your community. Go out to the marae, listen. What are the aspirations for students? What aspirations do students have for themselves? And I think once Misbah's right, once you've challenged yourself and you've understood and you have the why, then you start to put in place step by step what you need to do in your classrooms and in your school, really.
And I think that your starting point is you've got to believe that every kid in front of you can learn. I mean, that's it. Like, that's all we did. Really, if you ask what is the one thing we changed, we looked at every single 15-year-old or 14-year-old in front of us and said, we believe you can learn.
Yeah.
How hard is that?
Awesome. And Viv, did you want to have any final words before we close?
Yeah, I think it's working together as a team, and that's the big thing. You can't do this on your own. You can't do this in one class, and that's what I said. The leadership is so important. that they're behind it and supporting it as well. And also, you know, often you will get whānau coming in because if they're worried that their child won't be extended or their child won't be supported, yes, you know, we need to talk to them about that. But when they see what it is that you're doing and what the children are doing, yeah, so it's a three-way conversation. So there's no one place to start, but making a start is a good start.
Awesome, Karo. And now, please, Rangatahi, you've been reflecting on this. Is there anything we're now listening? We're listening and we want it to be relevant. Is there anything that you want us to be paying attention to above, you know, beyond what you've already shared with us?
Yeah, well, just to touch with that quoted all around just the ability grouping, I think. Having everyone in the same class, or the abilities all in the same class really does help. For example, the missus, she was in the high stream class for math, though she told me she actually sucked at it. I don't know how bad that was, but she said she was pretty poor. But luckily for her, she ended up getting streamed high. And thanks to that, with her classmates around her, that environment kind of built up her math ability. She ended up getting excellence. So it just goes to show that like that kind of stuff really does help. Yeah, I just wanted to share that little cordial. Anyone else?
Yeah, kia ora. Yeah, just my mind's just instantly going to the bird's eye view. I think of all of the things right now, and we talk about solutions and alternatives, and like literally this is a big journey to kind of tackle an intergenerational problem. And it's kind of interesting how we think we can do that in just 5 years, which is a bit ridiculous in my mind. But like you say, like what can we do each day to be able to differentiate that factor? As in, you know, in the bigger grand scheme of things, one of my friends is a teacher and he says, you know, you literally have the power to influence a young person in their life to make their decisions. And it's just that some teachers just rock up to it as it's just a job, you know, and that's hard, but yeah, just a little thing there for me.
Kia ora, Giahnnii.
So one more thing, Megan.
Go,
there's also talking about if we're maybe trying to able to adjust how we approach this ending streaming thing. I think it was mentioned before with if we can change it from taking away streaming, because I think that's what the parents fear the most, is that their kids are losing something. But instead, all we're doing is lifting everyone up to get the same privilege as the top kids. So maybe working on changing how we word things and how we deliver that image would probably benefit, I think. I hope at least. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kaya, did you want to say anything? It's not compulsory.
I don't have anything prepared, but I will say thanks to everyone for joining us tonight, and just listening to everybody's whakaaro around the streaming kaupapa was really inspiring. So I'm just pleased to have so many people on board the waka, because we can make this change, and I'm just stoked to be a part of just a massive systems change that's going to be a positive for everybody, not just Māori.
Beautiful, beautiful, thank you. Well, that was an extraordinary conversation, and I felt really privileged to be in the room with you all while we did that. And I want to really awhi everyone on their journeys towards, you know, wherever you're at, whatever conversations you're going to start having next, whatever new whakaaro that you're going to invite in around this. Yeah, I just really want to say you're not alone, and that's what the whole purpose of Action Station is for you to feel and know that you are in a community of people who are like you, who and who are able to, share in robust conversation and hard conversations. I think that's, part of the job here is to lean into those very awkward places. So as you do that, as you go out into your life and you have some awkward conversations, just remember that we're all here and we've all had this experience. So ngā mihi kia koutou. I would just like to finish with a karakia, and this recording will be shared with you, so you will lose nothing. Thank you. Kia whakariria te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. Good night, everyone.